Imagine you've got £200, a couple of BlackBerry phones, a USB drive that may contain some evidence, I don't know, and the clothes on your back. And you know that the moment of escape is right now. This is your chance. And if you don't take that chance, you're going to be thrown back into a prison and you don't know when you'll ever get out. Also, you could be flown off to a remote destination and you'll never see your wife and children again. That was the dilemma that faced Mike Rinder, the author of A Billion Years, My Escape from a Life in the Highest Ranks of Scientology. And it was one of the most thrilling, heartbreaking books I've ever read. And the book opens with his escape scene. And it's just so heart-poundingly exciting. It's as good as a Mission Impossible film, Tom. Okay, so I'm going to review A Billion Years, and I just want to make something very, very clear. There is the side of Scientology where you have people that are choosing to be in the religion of the Church of Scientology, and they wish to do it because they want to improve their lives and improve the lives of their family. I am not reviewing this book to have a go at any of those good people. I live in a democracy. We are free to worship how we wish. That is the beauty of a democracy. But this book doesn't deal with really the parishioners of the Church of Scientology. It deals with the organisation and the corruption within the administration, the higher echelons of the organisation. And it's so revealing and just captivating. Mike Rinder joined at the age of 18 the Sea Org. Now, he had grown up in Scientology because his family, lovely family in Australia, were just a part of the church. And nothing awful sort of befell him at all. It was just part of their life. It was what they did. And when he was 18, he joined the Sea Org. Now, the Sea Org is like this elite core for Scientology. It's people that were going to go and work for L. Ron Hubbard, who was still alive then, himself, and on these ships or boats. Now, L. Ron Hubbard was on boats on international waters because he was fleeing a lot of legal troubles that were happening in the United States at the time. So his safest port was an international one, let's say. So Mike Rinder joins this boat as part of the Sea Org, and as part of the Sea Org, these people have to sign billion-year contracts because part of Scientology is a belief that there is a long past life and a long future life, and that you basically just drop your body and that it all goes on. And so they have to sign this billion-year contract. Now, the other thing about the Sea Org is that despite having to undergo really horrific things on quite a lot of occasions, which I'll detail a bit for you, but I want you to read his book, they doubt their own reactions to things. So when Mike Rinder got to this boat and he had an awful smelly bunk in an overcrowded group sort of below decks area, and the food was lousy and the work was horrendous and they got paid like 40 cents an hour, and you know, there was a lot wrong with it and it wasn't what he'd been promised. So his normal reaction was, oh, this is a bit weird, this is not good. But in Scientology, you're encouraged to think that the fault you find with anything is within yourself. And these faults that are within yourself are eradicated by going to auditing, where you hand on to two sort of tin cans where a low voltage sort of electrical current runs through this e-meter. And you have an auditor that sits on the other side. So when you're griping about the fact that, you know, you've got really lousy living conditions and you're only getting paid 40 cents an hour and the needle's going, the auditor's saying, yes, that's a read. And from what I can gather is they ask questions and they get you to revisit and delve into the thing that's bothering you to the extent that you almost become get desensitized to it. You're no longer that worried about it. And then you go off and you feel a lot better. So that's sort of my explanation of auditing. So Mike Rinder is in the Sea Org and he works his way up to be actually one of the key spokespersons for the Church of Scientology. Now, L. Ron Hubbard, back in the 1930s, was sort of an author, a science fiction author that wasn't successful yet. He was sort of doing little penny dreadful cheap paperbacks. But he did have a hit in the 50s with Dianetics. And Dianetics was when he first sort of came to the public consciousness. And it was basically a self-help book that was lauded as being really helpful to a lot of people. And L. Ron Hubbard went on the lecture circuit and sort of managed to get some bucks out of this, and it was all going rather well. But unfortunately, the interest faded. So L. Ron Hubbard went away, added a bit more material to it, and called it Scientology. But this time, he put in a framework, a money-making framework that, from what I can gather, is like levels of course materials. And as people want to get higher within this bridge to freedom, which is what this coursework or course materials are called, then they have to pay more and more money. Now, Tom Cruise himself said in an interview in 2016 that the earlier parts of the program are secular and very helpful. It's not until you get into the OT levels where things get a little bit funny, let's say. And I'm not going to read out OT level 3. It's out there on the internet if you want to look it up. But L. Ron Hubbard worked into it that you couldn't hear OT3 until you were ready to hear it. In other words, until you'd paid for all the other levels to get to that level. Because if you did and you weren't ready to hear it, you would get sick and die. So no one ever listened to OT3 unless they were legitimately up to that point. But the trouble is that OT3 has had a very big reaction for people that have actually heard it. It's been mocked and ridiculed. It's all about an intergalactic villain who sent people down to the prison planet, which was Earth, and put them into volcanoes. And they were frozen in glycol before they were transported down. And then hydrogen bombs were sort of activated, and then they all died in these volcanoes. I'm probably explaining it really badly. And so then they became sort of these damaged spiritual beings or thetans that attach themselves to you. And these thetans are cleared through auditing and the practices of Scientology. And then the aim is, this bridge to freedom is to go clear. So that's a basic rundown. When L. Ron Hubbard died, David Miscavige was the person who sort of took up the reins as leader. And you'll know him probably from the early 2000s because he was instrumental in really encouraging Tom Cruise to be the face of Scientology in the early 2000s. And it was very effective. You'll remember, you can look it up on YouTube, there's Tom Cruise, really spruiking for Scientology very keenly. And he featured in video promos for Scientology, and he was given the Medal of Valor by Scientology. So, around 2004, it was a very active Tom Cruise public face of Scientology. And David Miscavige was the one who was the main driver behind this. Now, David Miscavige achieved something monumental when he took over the leadership. He was the one that managed to achieve tax-free status and a recognition of Scientology as a church, because at the time they owed a massive amount of money to the IRS. And let's put it this way, if David Miscavige hadn't pulled it off, then there would be no Church of Scientology, because they had $1 billion debt and it just would have wiped them out. But it was quite nefarious the way he achieved it. There was a lot of lawsuits and legal things happening against individuals in the IRS as well as the organisation itself. And they were targeted so heavily that in the end, it seems, although this is only alleged, that they basically just backed off and let them have that tax-free status because too much damage, too much pressure was descending upon them. But David Miscavige was heralded as of achieving this, and his power then in the Scientology organization became unparalleled. And Mike Rinder was one of the people that he sent out. So if there was an interview about Scientology, or if there was going to be an expose or a documentary about Scientology, Mike Rinder was sent out to sort of be the PR spokesperson for Scientology. And the crazy thing is, in the last years of him being in Scientology, he was doing that from the hole. Now, the hole is a prison-like structure that has all the doors barred, the windows only open about 2 inches, and there's a 24-hour security guard on the main entrance. So no one can get in or out without going through this security guard. Now, David Miscavige apparently went a little bit in the last few years that Mike Rinder was in this higher echelons of Scientology, and David Miscavige put 40 high-ranking members of the organisation, Sea Org, into this hole, into this prison. And they were in there for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And there's since been reports, a lot of reports, that people have disappeared into the hole and have been there for years. One man even in there for up to 7 years. So they were all in the hole, and they had to write out their sins against Scientology and their sins against David Miscavige in undermining him. And he used to play all these sorts of mind games with them. And you can imagine that with no proper beds to sleep on, there was just mattresses up on the roof, and evidently they were all damp. It was sort of basically offices they were in. There were bathrooms, but they weren't, they were office sort of bathrooms. Food was just leftovers from the Scientology canteen, the Sea Org canteen. It was rough. It was bad. And these 40-plus people were just in these sort of offices with nylon carpets, stuck, not able to leave. Some of them were separated from their partners, some were separated from their children, there was ill health, it was horrific. So it became pretty Lord of the Flies, let's say. And the people started to turn on each other, trying to curry favour with David Miscavige so they could be let out of this hole. And Mike Rinder, describes awful things happening, fights and mind games and even physical and mental torture. There were accusations made against people, and they were made to stand in rubbish bins while cold water was poured over their head while they're under an icy sort of air conditioning vent, and they might be made to stand there for 24 hours, and just horrific allegations. So Mike Rinder and other top members would be pulled from this hole, sent off to do a job by David Miscavige, which they would do even if it meant lying for him and lying for the Church of Scientology, and then they would be put back in the hole. So you could imagine how that would play with your mind. And they were still firmly of the belief that the problem lay within them, that if they did a good enough job that they wouldn't be in the hole, and that there must be something about them that was causing all this. And of course, David Miscavige played on this. Now, Mike Rinder, the last time he got out of the hole, he was sent to London. And he was actually housed at a place just outside London called St Hill. And he was dispatched because the BBC Panorama program were doing an expose on Scientology, and David Miscavige basically wanted him to stop it being aired. But Mike Rinder was a little bit more realistic, and he knew that they were planning to air allegations of physical and mental abuse by David Miscavige against Sea Org members, because there had been other people that had escaped earlier and had told their stories. So Mike Rinder thought that it was a great achievement to just basically make sure that those allegations against David Miscavige were not aired in the Panorama program, and he achieved it. He was even interviewed on camera, and he lied to camera when the reporter asked him, has David Miscavige ever physically abused you? And Mike Rinder said, no, he hasn't. But the interesting thing is that Mike Rinder was already thinking of escaping. The thought of having to go back into the hole after he'd done this job for David Miscavige just filled him with horror. He just was feeling like he couldn't do this anymore. Well, the program was aired, and Mike Rinder was pleased because the damaging allegations against David Miscavige weren't included. But David Miscavige rang him up, and he was furious that he had actually allowed the program to get to air. I don't know how Mike Rinder was supposed to stop it. And he was raging at Mike Rinder. And then Mike Rinder got wind of the fact that David Miscavige said, put him on a plane to Western Australia, to the remote desert regions of Western Australia, never to be seen again. Give him $10, he'll never see his wife and children again. And Mike Rinder had read this in a memo to another member of staff. So he started to plan his escape. Now, I encourage you to buy this book because it opens with the escape, and you'll be hooked. You'll be hooked from that point. But I just want to get onto something a little bit more serious now. And I again want to point out that the people even in the Sea Org that join, they're doing it because they think they're saving the world. They think that they're doing a good thing for mankind. But I am disturbed a little bit about Tom Cruise. Now, I haven't seen anything from Tom Cruise recently about his affiliation with Scientology. The last interview that I've seen was in 2016, like I said. But all these materials, like Mike Rinder's book, their documentary Going Clear, which I'll link for you down below if you're interested, they've all come out. You've got Lee Remini's podcast. You've got credible, backed up accounts of the abuse that is taking place in the Sea Org. You've got children being separated from parents. You've got families being broke up because once you speak out against Scientology, then you're deemed a suppressive person and you can't see that family member again. There's lots of really harsh things going on within this administrative Sea Org part of Scientology. And with all this out in the public domain, I can't understand that Tom Cruise, as a poster boy for this organisation, responsible for a lot of people joining in the early 2000s, doesn't feel a sense of responsibility to clarify all the allegations that are being brought up by these publications. If they aren't true, surely he can address them. Surely he can answer them. But it disturbs me. Now I've read this book, I'm thinking these questions have to be asked. So Tom Cruise, I've got a question for you. And I'm not implying that you're doing anything wrong. I'm sure that you believe that your association with this religion is a good thing for the world and that you're doing good things. But now all these aspersions are being cast against the organisation of the Church of Scientology. I think you need to read and address and answer all the questions that have been raised. If I was the public face of an organisation, I would. If I was the public face of Scientology and all these allegations had been raised in a book, like Mike Rinder's book, I would answer it. I would address it. I would make a video and put it out on YouTube about my concerns about what is said and why, in my opinion, it wasn't true. And that's what I think the people that are the public faces of Scientology need to do. And then everyone can move on. But I suspect that they find it hard to do that because Scientology says that if you're a Scientologist, you're not allowed to look at any of this sort of material. And so L. Ron Hubbard basically wrapped it all up in a nice, neat little bow and it worked. So Mike Rinder, I encourage you to read his book. It is a wonderful read. It's fascinating. It's exciting, gives you a great insight into an amazing life. And also he runs a charity. It's called Aftermath, where he supports people that are escaping cults. And his child, his son and daughter are currently still part of the Sea Org, which Mike Rinder feels is a cult. And he is hoping, it is his hope, that they will read his book and one day escape. So let me know what you think once you've read the book. I'd be really interested to hear, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye.